It was a warm afternoon, and the whole field smelled of crushed grass and sun-warmed earth. A girl knelt down to pick a flower. She was 16, with her mother's hair, and she was happy. She did not see the shadow standing at the edge of the trees. She did not notice that the cicadas had suddenly gone quiet, and she had no idea that, in a few moments, she would vanish from the world above for half a year. This is the story of how a young woman became queen of the dead. People tell it as a love story. It isn't. The oldest versions of this myth are far darker than the one we know today. In them, a god watches a girl from the trees. A grieving mother decides that if she cannot have her daughter back, then no one will have anything at all. And the girl herself, in the end, may have made a choice that no one saw coming, not even the gods. But to understand how it happened, we have to go back. Not to the meadow, and not to the chariot, but to a time when the world was still young, and the harvest itself answered to a single mother. Her name was Persephone, though almost no one called her that. To her mother, she was simply Kor, which just means the girl. She was the daughter of Demeter, and Demeter was grain itself. Not the goddess who watched over grain, but the living force inside it. Where Demeter walked, the wheat grew thick around her feet. Where she sat, the soil turned warm. The Greeks believed something we have mostly forgotten, that their gods were not kind. They were forces of nature. And Demeter was the force that kept everyone fed. Her daughter was something even rarer. The girl was spring itself. Whatever bloomed in the warm months bloomed because she had walked past it. Her father was Zeus, but Zeus had countless children and almost no time for any of them. So Persephone was raised by her mother alone in a quiet land of orchards and coastline, surrounded by other young women, the daughters of gods and rivers, who spent their days in the meadows of Sicily. No one had ever asked her what she wanted. There had never been a need. The world stayed warm for her. Flowers opened where she walked. She was loved, and she was watched, and she was, as far as anyone could tell, happy. She did not yet know that you could want something you did not have. That would come later, after everything changed. We do not know when Hades first saw her. The oldest version of the story doesn't bother to explain it. It treats his wanting her the way the Greeks treated the weather, as something that simply happened. There was a god who lived beneath the earth. The Greeks were so afraid of him that they avoided saying his real name. They called him other things instead, the Rich One, because he held everything buried in the ground. He had been down there a very long time. Longer than Olympus had existed, longer than the war that made the gods, longer than any of his nieces and nephews had been alive. He was the eldest brother of Zeus and Poseidon. When the three of them divided up the world, Hades drew the kingdom of the dead. He did not argue. He went down to his country and he stayed. The dead were quiet. The dead were predictable. For thousands of years, he ruled them alone. Then one afternoon, he looked up at the world above, and he saw the girl. The old stories are careful here. They do not say he fell in love. They say only that he wanted her, and that he went to his brother. Here is the thing about the gods. When they wanted a mortal woman, they simply took her. They came as bulls, as golden light, as birds and rivers. They lied, and they never once asked. But Persephone was not a mortal woman. She was Demeter's daughter, and Demeter was the reason there were any people left alive to worship anyone at all. So this time, Hades asked. He went to Zeus. And Zeus, who had never once raised the girl, said yes. He agreed without telling Demeter. He agreed without telling Persephone. And the abduction was set for an afternoon in Sicily, in a meadow where she liked to gather flowers. The meadow was in Sicily, near a place the Romans would later call Enna. It was full of lilies and crocus and iris, the kind of meadow where a girl could lose a whole afternoon. Persephone was there with the daughters of Ocean. They were her friends, and they had spent the morning weaving flowers into wreaths. Then she noticed something the others had missed, a flower she had never seen before. A narcissus. It was enormous, 100 blossoms on a single stem, and its scent filled the whole sky. The earth itself had grown it, on Zeus's orders, to delight her and to draw her in. She bent down to pick it, and the ground opened. Hades came up out of the earth on a chariot of black gold, pulled by 4 black horses. He caught her, lifted her into the chariot, and the ground closed over them. She screamed. She screamed for her father, and whether he heard her, no one knows. The other girls saw none of it. One moment their friend was reaching for a flower, and the next she was simply gone. For an hour they called her name. Nothing answered. Not a god, not a person, not even a bird. The strange flower was gone too. Where she had stood, there was only a little broken earth and nothing else. The girls ran home to their mothers, and their mothers had no idea what to tell them. The afternoon wore on. The shadows grew long. The cicadas started up again, and the cracked ground healed shut. By the time the first stars came out over Sicily, Persephone was already far below, a third of the way to the kingdom of the dead. None of the old stories describe what it was like to be carried down into the underworld in the arms of a god. They simply skip it. "We know only this," she screamed. No one heard, and then she arrived. The journey itself is a blank. But we do know the place she arrived in. The kingdom of the dead, as the early Greeks imagined it, was not the fire and torment that came later. It was quiet, gray. The dead drifted there in vast, soft, forgetful crowds, and they rarely spoke. Its rivers ran dark and slow. Pomegranate trees stood without giving any light. The palace of Hades was enormous, and it had no windows. Giants had built it in the age before the gods, and it had no use for the sky. Its throne room was a hall of black stone. The throne itself was a single piece of raw rock, and beside it now stood a second seat. Hades had had it built. How long it had waited there, empty, no one can say. When Persephone was brought into his hall, Hades spoke to her gently. The Greeks had a word for that kind of voice, soft, honeyed, soothing. He told her she would be his queen, that she would have honor, that the dead would obey her, and that she would be a great power among them. But he did not tell her she could ever leave, and he did not tell her how long she would stay. She would not eat. Not a single bite. She sat in the second seat, and she would not look at him, and she would not speak. And far above, in her mother's kingdom, on the surface of the world, the wheat had already started to die. Demeter heard her daughter scream. How far away she was, the story doesn't say, only that the sound reached her and that she dropped what she was holding, tore the veil from her hair, and began to run. She ran for 9 days. 9 days without eating, without sleeping, without rest. She lit 2 torches at the fires of Mount Etna and carried them across the whole face of the earth, searching for her child. She asked everyone she passed, shepherds, sailors, farmers, children. She asked the gods, and they said nothing. She asked the rivers, and they did not know. For 9 days, no one could tell her a thing. On the 10th day, she met Hecate, an older goddess of crossroads and moonlight and witchcraft. Hecate had heard a girl cry out, but she had not seen who took her. So the 2 of them went together to Helios, the sun, who sees everything. And Helios told her the truth plainly. He told her that Hades had taken her daughter, that Zeus had agreed to it, that the meadow had been chosen as a meeting place, that the whole thing had been arranged between 2 brothers, in a conversation Demeter was never invited to. For a long time, she said nothing, and then she did something no Greek had ever seen a god do. She left Olympus. She abandoned her temples and her duties, disguised herself as an old woman, and walked down into the world of mortals. And she stopped answering prayers. And the grain stopped growing. Not slowly, all at once. The wheat stopped forming. The seeds would not sprout. The vines went still. And people began to starve in less than a year. The children went first. Then the old. Then everyone. The temples of the other gods filled with people begging for food, and the other gods could do nothing because only Demeter could make the grain grow. And Demeter, disguised as an old woman, sat beside a well in a small town called Eleusis, silent, waiting for her daughter to come home. This is the part the modern retellings leave out. Eleusis was a small, poor town. Its king was named Kaleos, and he had 4 young daughters and 1 baby son. The daughters found Demeter at the well and brought her home, never guessing who she was. They thought she was just an old woman who had lost everything, and, in a way, they were right. Demeter was given work as a nurse to the king's infant son. His name was Persephone, and the goddess came to love this baby. Or rather, she loved what the baby could become, if she made it so. Every night, once the household was asleep, Demeter carried the infant to the hearth and held him over the fire. She was burning the mortality out of him. In her grief, she had decided to make a mortal child immortal, to keep one baby from ever dying, since she had not been able to keep her own daughter from being taken. And the strange thing was, the boy did not burn. He was being changed, growing stronger, growing brighter, becoming something close to a god. The household began to whisper that there was something unnatural about the child. He had started, very faintly, to glow. Then one night, his mother woke in the dark and went looking for her son. She found the old nurse standing over an open fire with the baby held in the flames. The queen screamed, and the scream broke the spell. The boy fell from the fire. He was not dead, but he would never be a god now. He had been changed only halfway. He would live, and one day he would die, like any other man. Then Demeter let her disguise fall away. She rose to her full height, filled the room with light, and told them who she was, and what she had been doing, and what gift she had nearly given a family too small to understand it. And then, because she was a goddess and a goddess in mourning, she did one more thing. She ordered the people of Eleusis to build her a temple. Every autumn, she told them, they would gather there and grieve, whether or not they remembered why. And anyone who spoke of what happened inside it would die. This was the beginning of the Eleusinian Mysteries, the most secret religious rite in the ancient world. They lasted more than 1,000 years. Everyone who took part was forbidden, on pain of death, to describe what they had seen inside. Most of them kept the secret. A few did not. And the few who broke it were killed, exactly as the law had promised. So we still do not know what happened inside that temple. We know only that it began with a grieving goddess and a baby held in a fire. And there was one more cruelty, almost too small to mention. As Demeter crossed the dying world, she stopped at a small house where an old woman gave her water and a barley cake. The goddess was exhausted, and she drank fast. And the woman's little son laughed at her for drinking so greedily. Demeter looked at him. She said nothing, and she turned him into a small spotted lizard. He slipped into the wall of his mother's kitchen and never came out again. And his mother lived the rest of her days with the little lizard that had once been her child. This is the Demeter the old stories show us. Not gentle, not patient, a force in mourning, one that punished a child for laughing. Eventually, even the gods on Olympus realized that something had to be done. People were dying in huge numbers. The temples stood empty, and the other gods, whose worship depended on humans staying alive, began to complain. They went to Zeus and told him to fix it. So Zeus, who had allowed the abduction in the first place without asking anyone, was now being asked to undo it. He sent Hermes. The messenger was the one god who could pass freely between the worlds, and he went down into the kingdom of the dead, found Persephone in her dim hall, and gently told her that her mother was about to end the world. Zeus had decided, he said. She could go home. Persephone jumped up from her throne with joy. But before she could leave, Hades did one last thing. Alone with her, he gave her a pomegranate, and she ate 6 small seeds. Whether she understood what those seeds meant, no one agrees. Some say she had no idea. Others say she knew exactly what she was doing. But the rule was the same either way. Once you had eaten the food of the dead, you became, in part, one of them. And there was a witness. A minor god of the underworld, a gardener, saw her eat. He went straight to Hades and told him, and Hades was very pleased. So Persephone left with Hermes. She rose up through the earth and met her mother in a clearing somewhere in Greece, and Demeter threw her arms around her and wept. And then she asked the question, had she eaten anything down there? And Persephone told her the truth. Yes. She told her about the pomegranate, and her mother knew at once what it meant. Demeter went back to Olympus and demanded justice. And Zeus, after some thought, gave his ruling. Persephone had eaten 6 seeds, so she would spend 6 months of every year below with Hades and 6 months above with her mother. That was the bargain. That was the compromise. Demeter accepted it only because she had no other choice. And before the gods went their separate ways, Demeter, who never forgot anything when looking for the witness, he was the one who had carried the tale to Hades. She turned him into a screech owl, a bird of bad omen that cries in the dark, whose voice means something terrible is coming. She made sure of it. She wanted the world to know who had spoken. And so we have winter. For 6 months of every year, Persephone sits in the kingdom of the dead while her mother grieves on the surface of the world. And for those 6 months, nothing grows. This is the version we still tell schoolchildren. And it is true. But notice what the older stories are willing to say and what we have quietly stopped repeating. That this is not a love story. That Persephone screamed when he took her. That her own father agreed to it in secret without a word to her or her mother. The gods who arranged all of this are still, at the end of the myth, the gods who run the world. Nothing happens to Hades. Nothing happens to Zeus. And Demeter, the only one who actually fought back, is the one we still call wrathful. And there is one more thing. Up in the mountains of Arcadia, there survived a much older version of Demeter. They called her Demeter the Fury. They worshipped her in a cave where she was carved as a woman with the head of a horse, her face painted black, and where no one was allowed to speak above a whisper. The people there did not pretend their goddess was kind. They knew what she had been through. And Persephone did come back. But she came back changed. She was no longer the girl in the meadow. She was the queen of the dead for half of every year, and the bringer of spring for the other half. And she had become something else as well. She had sat on the throne. She had watched the dead brought up and judged. She had grown harder than her mother ever was. The Greeks called her the Maiden. And sometimes, when they were less comfortable, they called her by her other name. They called her the Dread One. They would not say it aloud inside her temples. She had earned it.